Hi, I'm Lynn Coffin, and I'm here today with Jean LeBlon, who was latest in our series called Notable Nonagenarians. And let me read you a little bio of Jean. He was born in Saint-Remy, a village outside the walls of the medieval town of Chimay. Chimay? How do you say that?
Chimay.
Chimay, in southern Belgium, the French-speaking half of the country. That happened a mere 10 years after the end of World War I and only 11 years before the start of World War II. In between the crash of 1929, the American Depression, and the rise of National Socialism in Germany happened, among other things. This made for a rather bleak atmosphere for Jean's first 12 years. From 1940 to 1944, Belgium was occupied once more, and the teenage years were themselves void of travel, seashore or mountain holidays, or bread or coffee. When the GIs liberated the region, Jean's parents hosted many of the boys, and 3 of them invited him to come over to the United States as soon as he finished high school, which he did in 1946 on a horrendous 21-day crossing of the Atlantic. That means means accepting the invitation, not finishing high school. A visit to one of the men's hometowns led to a bachelor's degree from Kansas State Teachers College, English and Spanish, in Emporia, where he married Mary Havorka, a musician in the French horn, a music teacher, and an avid golfer. They moved to New Haven for Jean to finish a PhD in French literature at Yale in 1960. After teaching at Connecticut College, CCNY, and Hollins College, Jean was named professor and chairman of the Department of French and Italian at Vanderbilt University in Nashville and in French program in Aix-en-Provence. After retirement number 1, Jean and Mary moved to Edmonds. Mary joined a choir while Jean taught part-time at the UW, the Academy of Languages, and Seattle Pacific University. He also worked full-time at Microsoft as translator and senior terminologist. After retirement number 2 in 1995, he returned to translation work mainly as an accredited translator at the French Consulate General in San Francisco and to teaching in the Bellevue College Translation and Interpretation Institute. All along, Jean's time was spent in research and publication on extracurricular activities, such as 20 years as examiner at ETS for the College Board, and 10 years as trainer of African teachers in the Peace Corps, member of the board of the American Translation Association, president of the Alliance Française of Seattle, and board member of the Seattle Nantes Sister City Association. Mary died in November 2007 after 55 years of common interests and enjoyment together. So, and then he mentions his 2 daughters. So, Jean, it's quite a varied career. Do you want me to say about your daughters?
What?
Do you want me to say more about your daughters? Or?
No, not necessarily. No.
Yeah. So say a little bit more. You mentioned that your first 12 years had a rather bleak atmosphere. Can you sort of try to communicate to us what that was like? Any incidents stand out, or?
My life, you mean, in Belgium?
Right, in Saint-Remy, your first 12 years.
Between the wars, yeah. Well,
What's your first memory? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, first memory is from a strange business.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, I was about 5 years old or something, and there were terrible upsets in Paris at the time, because actually between the wars there was a lot of political difficulties in France. It was, in fact, eventually the rise of the first leftist government. A man who became prime minister was the first person of that nature, political nature. And so, anyway, in answer to your question, it made the situation extremely volatile and unpleasant.
So was your first memory something to do with the politics, or?
Yes, right, of the fact that my parents seemed to be bothered and unhappy. You know, it was after the First World War, thinking that some people thinking, well, now it's over, but it wasn't over.
Uh-huh.
And the atmosphere was unpleasant.
Right.
So we didn't travel. We didn't get anywhere too very far. My parents could have afforded it.
They couldn't afford it?
I say they could have afforded it, but maybe they didn't have the opportunities because of the situation.
Uh-huh.
The difficulty at the borders, we couldn't cross the borders to France. Actually, we were living 20 minutes from the border, but
you stayed in Belgium the whole time you were
gone. We had difficulty getting out.
Right. What was the first time you got out of Belgium? How old were you?
Oh, well, after the war, of course. But before the war, I don't know, off and on, we did eventually get out. My father was able to drive out through the border, but the first time that I got out of that was when I came over here, 1940s.
And what was schooling like? What was when you're school?
Yeah, well, I don't remember that. I don't remember the school before the war. But during the war, I do remember that we had a bit like what's happening here now. We had to move out of the building we were in because it was possibly in danger of a bombing or from because of during the war, bombing by Germans, obviously, who were trying to demolish the railroad system.
Right.
For instance,
So why was your house? Was it taller or nearer the railroad tracks, or what made it so dangerous?
It was very close
To the railroad tracks.
Yeah, right.
And did you move?
And I was talking about the school. The school also in town was right next to the station, the railroad station. So they decided that we would move out to the countryside into somebody's barn or something where we had the school.
So you had the school in someone's barn?
Yeah, so we walked. Well, yes, probably a barn, or maybe the local village municipal building. But we had to walk to it every morning, Gosh.
Okay.
In sometimes very inclement weather, which Belgium is pretty famous for.
Right. And were you old enough to sort of keep track of what was going on in the war? Did you listen to radio broadcasts?
Oh yes, well, during the war, that's interesting, good question, because we were not allowed normally by the forces, the German occupants, to listen to broadcast from England, or usually it was London. Every night at 9 o'clock we had a thing called Here is London, and so on. And
Here is London? I'm sorry. Yeah.
This is London. And we would have news of the war as it went on in their viewpoint. So what was the question? Well, the fact that how close we felt, well, of course, basically we suffered from the lack of all kinds of things.
Right.
And one of them, of course, was also the difficulty of getting the victuals and other things we needed.
Getting what?
Meat, bread, whatever. We had to go get it.
Right.
Usually on a bicycle. And sometimes very far, going to a farmer's barn, to a farmer's place to get milk, let's say, or butter. beg for it, kind of pray for it pretty high, because in the meantime, when we were living in the countryside near these farmers, we sometimes were able to, because we knew them and so on, we would get these things at a reasonable price. But then they would say, oh, well, you know, this week I have to ask you, because they come from Brussels, and they give us, you know, they
People
offer
came
us
from
a lot more
Brussels?
money.
Yeah.
People were coming from the cities.
Right. Yeah. Do you remember, how old were you when the Germans occupied Belgium?
Well, I was 12.
12.
Yeah.
And do you remember a moment when...
1940, when they come, yes, of course. In May, the war started in September 39, right? With the attack of the Germans on Poland, 1939. In 1940, and between 39 and 40, there wasn't much going on. There was the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line, these two lines, German and French, they were looking at each other and they didn't move.
Right.
Then in 1940, May 40, the Germans attacked Poland.
France.
And then, of course, France and Belgium and so on, yeah. Everybody stood for Poland, and the war started for everybody.
Right.
On May 10th, I think it was the 10th, we, as many other people, decided to leave, to get away from the Germans, take off. And
were they already in Belgium then?
No, they were coming.
They were coming.
Yeah.
So where would you leave to get away from them?
Just to go to France, just to get in a car and put a mattress on top of the roof. And
you did that?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And did you get to France?
Oh, yes.
And
yes. We ended up in Limoges, near Limoges in southern France. And that took a few months. So, yeah, we took off in May 10th. In the meantime, strangely enough, in that little part of Belgium...
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Yeah. In the little part of Belgium of which she made my hometown, East Park, was designated by the Germans as empty. They had to empty it. I don't know, surface of a few miles around. Got everybody out because Hitler was coming through.
Oh.
He was going to Paris. He was going to win, you know, and he was going to show off. And so he stopped in this farm, in this little farm village. Took off the roofs, so the airplane wouldn't recognize the place.
Oh.
Build a little fort there for the weekend.
But you were in France at this time.
We were gone by then.
Yeah, so
in fact, we couldn't go back.
So how long did you stay in France?
I had about 2 months.
Yeah, and then you went back to Belgium.
From May to July. Yes.
And what was it like? I'm trying to imagine what it was like. What was the German presence greater or lesser in Belgium, where you were living, than it had been in France?
Yes, it was more so because the armistice was signed.
Right.
I forget, sometime at the end of June or July. And at that moment, they drew a line across France, the north and south. The north was occupied by the Germans, the south was not.
Uh-huh. So, but if you were in the south, which was not occupied by Germans, why did you go to Belgium?
Because
that was home?
It was home, yeah.
Yeah. And so...
You had to get back, and we got back and found that the house had been pillared, you know, pretty much.
Was there a roof on it?
Oh yeah, nothing had happened to the house itself, but it was empty. They were very organized. When we got back, we realized right away that we had an amount of mattresses in our house.
They'd taken all the mattresses?
All the whatever.
All the mattresses?
All the mattresses, all the, I don't know.
So where did you sleep then? Did you?
Yeah, we worked this out. But what I was saying also is that this was all ready for the Germans to take back.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times they didn't stay long enough to organize it further. So not only did we realize that we had lost our mattresses to the Germans, but we also lost quite a few things to our neighbors.
Oh, so they
because during the time we were all gone.
Right.
Some of them went back
right.
after it was allowed to go back. It's very much like what's happening here,
Right.
Mask, no mask,
right.
In and or out.
Right.
And so,
right.
So there were decisions made. So at that point, a lot of the Belgian people took advantage of that. And,
right.
Well,
so I'm getting but I would like to focus in on you, on your experience.
And that's an interesting thing that you ask that, because actually one of the longest effect of the war on me and the rest of people of my generation is how long the spirit of mistrust lasted in Belgium.
Right, because you were also mistrusting neighbors as well as...
Right. Not only because of that, to start with, but throughout the war, after all, there were people who worked with the Germans, who sympathized with the Germans, who, some of them had figured out to make money from the Germans and so on. So there was a lot of tension.
Right.
Talk about Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, but you were 12 at the time, 12, 13, and so forth.
Up to 18, yeah.
So how did this affect you? Did you see soldiers in the streets? Did you ever have any encounter with the Germans?
Some, yes, some. They would come around at night to get us to turn off the lights, scare us one way or another. I think they played with us quite a bit. They were these occupation forces were not very active. Now,
so they would play games with you,
Yeah. Another viewpoint is another thing to remember and to remark is that there were people who were engaged in activities against the Germans, probably trying to set up a way to blow up a railroad intersection, for instance.
And
they were what we call the maquis.
Right.
The maquis is the French word for this wild vegetation.
Right.
And these people were maquisards. They were actively acting against the Germans.
But you weren't involved in that, were you?
No.
So I want to focus on you.
That's true. Yeah, but it created difficulties. It created difficulties traveling, fear of one way or another. Yeah, it was. It did affect us, there's no question.
Right.
We went to school, of course, and some people, the school system attempted to be normal. It was not, of course. I mean, we were not able to do it the way we should have. We would have otherwise.
Right. So let me ask you about if I could, did you want to finish that? I'm sorry.
Well, personally, in answer to your question, it marked us, perhaps not as much as it did the generation ahead of us, you know, or older than us. And even as young people, we realized what we were doing and what was happening to us.
Can you think of, it's hard for me, I'm trying to visualize you as a 12 or 13, 14-year-old
Yeah,
boy, what
yeah,
you, because you have this historical viewpoint, you talk about us and we, but
yeah.
what about you, that's what most interests me, is because I can't imagine what it would be like to have your country invaded and have
yeah.
Germans. So were you aware, for example, of the anti-Semitism? Did you have a
Yes, oh yes, indeed.
And how did you become aware of that, or
Well,
what?
one way is my parents had, my mother had lived in Paris for a while during the First World War, and she had Jewish friends who she tried to stay in touch with during the 40s war, and did so, and found that these people had been picked up, and the son and so on. And so the young man, they had been to our house in the 30s when I was 6, 7, 8. The boy there, I forget his first name now, he'd come and spend a week or two with us. My mother had stayed close to these people, and yeah, that was one way in which took.
And it says here, so you made friends with these boys.
Yeah.
These were soldiers, American soldiers.
Right.
And were they all together coming to the house, or just one after another? Or?
No, yeah. The way that happened is that I was, of course, 18 by then, and I was very attracted by these guys. And there was, in the woods, not far from our home, about a mile or so, there'd been a artillery outfit that had come from the D-Day, you know, and had moved up to Belgium and stopped in late August for a rest right at the border there of Belgium and France, where we are. And I just thought, well, it'd be fun to go and look around over there, see what I can see, maybe a gun or something. You know. Artillery. So I just, walked up there. So
you walked just yourself?
Oh yeah, all by myself. That's right. And I saw a soldier who was raking something. He was cleaning something up in the land, in a pasture near the farm where they were there. And I talked to him. I didn't speak English very clearly. Obviously, I don't know. We did have English in school, but it was not very well. The Germans didn't like that anyway, that we were learning English. So anyway, as I remember, he took me closer and he said, "Oh, I can't show you the guns. That's not possible." But he started to talk. He was in charge of the kitchen.
The kitchen. Yeah.
Yeah, the kitchen. Movable kitchen there, and